Welcome. My name is Aaron David Poston, and welcome to the Yibum Beit Midrash. We are starting a series in conjunction with Jewish Family Forever, Fireside Chat with Rabbi Yitzchak Breitowitz. Now let me introduce you first to the idea of Jewish Family Forever, and then I will introduce Rabbi Breitowitz. So Rabbi, Dr., Professor, friend, Gary Schiff. Gary Schiff, he is one of the initiators for Jewish Family Forever, and what they stand for is strengthening Jewish families in Israel and around the world. By what? Providing learning opportunities focused on strengthening Jewish families online or in person. Also building connections with other organizations and faiths who share similar values for their constituent families. Ensuring schools support traditional family, Torah-based values, and number 4, actively supporting legislation or judicial reform which will support Jewish traditional Torah values throughout society, and countering the influence of those who are pushing the celebration of relationships and identities which are against Torah values. Now, our star of the show is Rabbi Professor Yitzchak Breitowitz. He is the Rav and Senior Lecturer in Or Sameach. He's the Rabbi Emeritus of 22 years in the Woodside Synagogue in Silver Spring, Maryland. He's also the Tenure Professor of Law Emeritus at the University of Maryland. And I think this is one of his highlights of all. He gives the weekly Torah lecture here at the Yibum Beit Midrash on the Yibum YouTube channel, which I strongly suggest that you subscribe and you hit the notification bell so that when the newest videos are uploaded, you will be notified. And without any further ado, I will introduce now, I will switch seats with Gary Schiff.
Rabbi Poston, thank you very much. We're excited about this project. We're excited about this lecture and many more to come to work to really help to strengthen the Jewish family around the world. And we're thrilled that the Yibum and Rabbi Breitowitz have joined us in this effort. I just want to say one thing. This week is my father's 4th yahrzeit. When he passed away, there were difficult decisions to make about end-of-life decisions. I was in Bethlehem at the time. That's the different Bethlehem than Bethlehem, Israel, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and I asked Rabbi Breitowitz how to proceed, and that's the kind of trust we had. He guided us, our family, in a beautiful way, and so we have a long relationship with Rabbi Breitowitz, and we trust him with our family, and I hope with the thoughts that he gives you today, you'll see how precious this rabbi is. Okay, I want to start with just a question, Rabbi, about, there's people that are actually talking about that, did they really need to get married? Do they need to, it's a time when people are questioning, when young girls are saying, is my value just in making babies? But they're really delaying marriage, and I know this isn't such a Jewish value to do this. And then the question is it on the young man's responsibility, the young woman's responsibility? Who's responsible for getting married, and what can we do here to encourage young people to go in the direction of Torah and to develop relationships and marriages at the right time in their lives?
Well, again, I just want to say that it's a real pleasure to participate with Gary in this very, very important project. And God willing, he should bring a great, great merit to his father's neshama. There is nothing as important in Judaism as the family, in particular the relationship of husband and wife and parent and child. And it is very, very true that more and more people are just either deciding not to get married or they're marrying late. They decide for various reasons not to have children even if they do get married. And obviously there are individual circumstances in which there needs to be flexibility, and I don't mean to cast aspersions on any individual case. But let me just recall to you a verse that is literally in the first parsha of the Torah that we're going to read this Shabbat. It is not good for man to be alone. Lo tov hayot adam levado. And the commentaries ask the obvious question, what's so bad about being alone? After all, Adam is in the Garden of Eden at that particular juncture. He has everything that he wants. There's only one tree he's not supposed to eat from. So what is existentially bad about being alone? And the commentaries give us a very striking insight that's very relevant to modern life. Man in a state of aloneness in the Garden of Eden has an infinite capacity to take from the world. But one cannot be godly, one cannot be good, until one learns how to go beyond their egotism, beyond their selfishness, beyond their hedonism, and care for another person. Marriage was not created, actually, so I should take things. Marriage was taken, what was given to me, given to us, so I should learn to be a giver and emulate the ways of God, who is a giver and not a taker, because God owns everything. Now, psychologically, this is a complex dynamic, and the reason is, part of being a selfless giver in life is giving the other person the opportunity to give to you. So actually, it's an interesting dynamic. The person that simply says, I give, I don't take, is actually a very bad spouse, because he or she does not give the other spouse the opportunity to become a giver. So there is room within the ethic of giving to be vulnerable enough to show that you need what the other person can give to you. But that's the whole point. The whole point of life, from a Jewish perspective, is to emulate the ways of God. Now, we live in a society which puts such a premium on gratification and hedonism. I want to make as much money as I can. I want to have as much fun as I can. And yeah, I'd like to have sex, so maybe, marriage is the means to have sex. And the truth of the matter is, in this society, you don't need marriage for sex. But all of that is about gratification. All of that is about hedonism. Godliness comes when you're willing to connect to another. You care about another. You go beyond your egotism. You're willing to even expose and reveal your vulnerabilities. And together, a couple can create something that is greater than the sum of their individual parts. And this is true, by the way, even if they don't have children. There's a whole discussion. There is a mitzvah in the Torah to have children. But one has to understand that marriage is good, and marriage is sacred, and marriage is noble within the context of the relationship of a husband and a wife. Then, of course, it gets augmented when you take on the role of parent. But one has to understand that even a childless marriage, as sad as that might be, is a sanctified, holy, noble, good relationship that makes the world better than it otherwise would be. Now, listen, I'm obviously aware of the fact that divorce rates have skyrocketed, and although the Jewish community is a little better than the general community, but it's not, at least in the United States, it's not much better. It's catching up in a negative way. And part of that, I think, and again, there are particular reasons. I mean, obviously the Torah allows for divorce, so the Torah obviously understands that sometimes marriages don't work. So I don't mean at all in anything that I say to cast aspersions on individual cases. I myself am very familiar with individual cases. But as a general proposition, I think the ethic of either not getting married or getting married very late or getting divorced comes from the ethos of instant gratification. Now, I remember the first time I got a fax machine. In those days we used to use fax machines. This was before email. And I had to send a fax from Baltimore to China. And it took 5 minutes. And I was drumming my fingers. What is taking so long? Right? So I too was habituated to instant gratification. I mean, think about 100 years ago, how long it would take to send a letter from Baltimore to China. It might take 6 months. And here I was being a little upset that it took 5 minutes. But that's what it is. We want instant gratification. I want it now. If my relationship doesn't work, throw it out. The phone doesn't work, throw it out. The camera doesn't work, whatever it is. Marriage doesn't work, throw it out. We're not used to the idea of hard work. And again, I include myself. We're not used to the idea that good things take sacrifice and they take effort. And that's kind of why when things don't work out, we just want to get out. We want to bail out. and go to the next instant gratification. So in the best way, again, it doesn't always work out this way because we don't, maybe they'll come up with other questions. We don't necessarily give our kids the education for marriage and the like. But in the best way, marriage is kind of almost the best school you can have in life to develop yourself morally, spiritually, to become a giver rather than a taker. And of course, when you're a parent, even more so. And more than yeshiva, more than a shul, more than anything, this can be the great laboratory for spiritual growth.
Thank you. It's beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. I was talking to my son, and he had an interesting analogy. He said, you were just talking about delaying marriage, that he compared it to the Netflix phenomenon. So it's a Saturday night, and a couple is Shabbat's over, and they want to watch a movie together, and so they start looking. And no, they don't like this one, they don't like that one. And before you know it, it took them a half hour, and they say, well, I guess we won't watch a movie tonight. So he compared, I don't know if he came up with that or who came up with it, but the idea is, the idea of looking for the perfect person, do we have too much of that going on? And how do you counsel young men, young women about what's the core things you're looking for, and where do you go with that?
Yeah, that's a very, very, very good analogy. And indeed, even within the most religious circles, we find this particular problem. This is not only a secular or less religious problem, and that is people look for perfection. People make up lists. They make up a list of 100 qualities, and they will not marry somebody because they only have 97 of them. And one has to understand that often the consequence of this is going to be they get nobody at all. The Talmud talks about the idea that things are predetermined, that God announces before you're born who you'll marry. Right. It's called bashert in Yiddish. So Chatan, a young man, went to the stipler and said, when will I find my bashert? And the stipler said, you met her 5 years ago. And you simply let the opportunity pass by. Again, I think part of the problem, once again, without at risk of repeating myself, it goes back to the notion that if I look at marriage as the thing that's supposed to give me gratification, then I want it to be perfect. But Voltaire himself said that the best is often the enemy of the better. That when we think things have to be 100%, we are disabled from doing something very significant. Think about in the aftermath of the Holocaust. Many of you would have parents or at least grandparents who are survivors of the Holocaust. That generation is actually dying out, but there's still some survivors. And many of them lost their first families in a tragic way. And they knew they had to rebuild the Jewish people. And I was not alive then myself, but the stories I'm told is you simply went over to somebody, hey, let's get married, and they made it work because they had a commitment, they had a vision. My spouse is not going to be perfect because I'm not perfect. I mean, listen, if I insist on perfection, who's going to want to marry me, right? So life is about compromising, and life is about prioritizing, and life is about an understanding that things are not going to be 100%, but you can make it good. You can make it, you and then with the other person. So when we talk about, what you're looking for in a partner in life, someone that's not a duplicate of you. In fact, in many ways, you might say opposites attract, and that has a certain amount of validity. If they're two opposites, it may not work. But you're looking for somebody that you're comfortable with, someone that you feel understands you, and someone that you feel you understand. We're looking, and again, even though I myself identify as Haredi, but I would say extreme religiosity is not necessarily the most important quality. You want, obviously, if you're an observant Jew, you want someone who's committed to mitzvot, but I would put much more emphasis on midot tovot, on kindness, on gentleness, on a sense of humility, a kind of happy, optimistic outlook on life, and someone that is flexible and willing to roll with the punches. Because, life is not perfect. Well, from God's perspective it is, but from our perspective, there's all sorts of imperfections that we don't understand. And if you can't roll with the punches, if you can't be resilient, if you can't have a sense of humor, if every little thing that goes wrong, is so upsetting to you, you're not going to be able to be a good spouse. And I would recommend when you're looking for a spouse, you're looking for those qualities of flexibility, resilience, optimism, hopeful attitude, and caring. And the Rosh Hashanah brings an interesting point. Avram had a servant, Eliezer, who was a righteous man, and Avram did not want his son to marry Eliezer's daughter. He sent Eliezer to Avram's family. These were a family of idolaters, of pagans. Why would Avram prefer pagans to his faithful servant? And the Ran says, because although Eliezer as a Canaanite was very, very righteous, the Canaanites had a streak of cruelty. And Avram knew that although his family was pagan, they had the quality of kindness, as Rivka demonstrated. And therefore the Ran says, I'm not giving this as a halacha, better to marry an idol worshiper who's kind than a very religious person who's cruel, because religious issues can be changed by education and exposure. But midot tovot are very difficult. If God forbid there's not a midat tovah, it's very difficult to acquire them. Right? So I think people are looking for the wrong thing. I mean, I know that people often emphasize, girls might emphasize in the Haredi world, black hat, the right yeshivot, etc. I think we need to focus much more on midos and resiliency and optimism and kindness as the primary qualities. And of course, let me just express the obvious idea. One does not have the right to hope for that type of shidduch unless you develop those qualities within yourself. Now, sometimes God gives you a freebie. That's true. Sometimes even a not such a great person might be zocha for whatever reason to a phenomenal partner in life. And again, some people have all the luck, so to speak. It's mazel from Hashem. But in terms of what you have a right to expect, you cannot expect to find a person of midot tovot unless you work on it yourself. So people have to realize that part of what is called the hishtadlut, the effort of trying to find a marriage partner, is the spiritual work on yourself to become a better person. And so again, those are the things that I would look for. Now, I do want to say one other thing. People often tell me, and I often hear this in the yeshiva world, wonderful woman. Again, I'm speaking from a male perspective. I deal with the men, but women might say the same thing in the other way around. Wonderful person, but I don't feel chemistry. I'm not sexually attracted. Is that important? So here I have to say the following. Theoretically, I could make a whole speech. Not important. The most important thing is midot tovot. But here's the thing. If you're the Chafetz Chaim, of course, the Chafetz Chaim doesn't ask me questions, but if you're the Chafetz Chaim, I would say, yeah, okay, looks are not important, chemistry is not important, just get married, make it work. But we're not the Chafetz Chaim. And the point is, even if something that may intrinsically not be so important, if it bothers you, if it affects you, if it gives you unease, then you can't go ahead with it. Because what's going to happen is, either you're going to get resentful, or the other person is going to sense that you're not attracted to them, and you're putting them through a tremendous shame and humiliation. So I could make a list of the theoretically most important qualities, but I also have to pay attention to what this individual person is bothered with. As a rabbi or as a counselor, for me to ignore even the idiosyncrasies of a person would be a very, very big mistake, would be a very great disservice. Right. So we do have to work within the limitations of the person. And of course, keep in mind that since sexual intimacy is part of a Jewish marriage, number one for children, but even without children, there's a mitzvah for husband and wife to have that intimacy. So there does have to be a certain amount of sexual attraction. Yeah.
I just want to follow up, just a quick follow-up.
Yeah.
Because I know of a couple, that things didn't work out with them, a young couple, because they were in a different place relative to one wanted to keep. Aren't there some, in terms of the religious world, are there some make or break kinds of things that you would say?
So first of all, I would have to say, it depends on your situation. What often happens is, husband and wife were in the same place when they got married, and then one became a Baal Tshuva and one didn't want to go there. That's one type of problem. But if you're talking about before we even get married, any time they're holding in a significantly different religious place, that is high risk. You're in the red zone automatically. However, that doesn't mean it's impossible. I wouldn't advise it, I wouldn't encourage it. But there are such unions, and some manage to be reasonably well. The only make or break issue really is Tarat HaMishpacha, because it takes two to tango, meaning the following. Theoretically, I can be a Shomer Shabbat even if my wife is not, or vice versa. Actually, commonly, the other way is the way it works. The wife might be a Shomer Shabbat and the husband not. Theoretically, we could agree to have a kosher home, but the other spouse is free to eat their treif in the garage or whatever it is. That is not optimal, and it creates a lot of confusion on the part of the kids, but it is possible. If, however, Tarat HaMishpacha is something which automatically affects the observance of the religious man or woman. Meaning, if I'm married to somebody who doesn't want to keep the laws of Nida, then I will not be able to keep those laws either. So I would have to say, just in a very superficial way, that the make it or break it point is the mikvah. Is the mikvah. Shabbat kashruts are, you can work it out, although with great difficulty, and I wouldn't encourage it, but it is a possibility. Nida is not a possibility, and I would also say that the second thing is Jewish education for the children, meaning to say, if I am married to a spouse who refuses to allow the children to have a Jewish education, that would have to be a make it or break it. And of course, the problem is, it's not even clear that divorce is going to help you, because with joint custody and the like, you may still have a problem. So be very careful in terms of where you go with that choice of marriage partner.
Very interesting. You know, Rabbi, I have a dear friend, and he's got 3 kids, and the kids are age, one's I think 26, one's probably pushing 30, and another one's 34. And none of them, from his perspective, or maybe he just doesn't know. Maybe he doesn't know, and there's something going on, but they're not. Nobody's engaged, nobody's dating, they may be dating, but there's nobody, and so, I almost don't want to ask them, hey, how are the kids? Because it's on their mind all the time, they pray for it. Is there any advice you can give to parents to somehow encourage adult children in this path? Is there a way to get to them, either through friends or through some other way to help in this situation? It's
very tricky with adult children, because adult children are adults, and I think halacha itself recognizes that parents should not be in the role of micromanaging the decisions that adult children make. I mean, part of parenting is to let your children grow up and make decisions even if they're not the most positive. So it is very tricky, and also it'll be counterproductive in many cases. If an adult child feels like, his mother says, when am I going to see a grandchild type of thing, it really turns them off, and it makes them almost more adamant not to have a relationship with that parent. So you have to be you as a parent to an adult child have to be very diplomatic, and kind of stress the positives. Don't kind of be accusatory. When are you going to get married? But just say, and hopefully. Now again, let me point out that if the parents don't have a good marriage, that itself is going to be a problem. But let's assume they have a good marriage. There can be a talk in which a parent can just say, I just want you to know that my life with your mother or my life with your father has been so good and so rewarding, and we got you out of that marriage, other children, and I just hope, I'm not going to push you, but I just hope you'll give some thought that maybe you could bring the same joy into your life that we've had in our life. Now, as I say, that works when you have a good marriage. If you don't have a good marriage, it's a little more difficult to market, so to speak. But you do it in a gentle way and in an open way, and not accusing and not making demands or the like,
Yeah. Okay, now this is, I want to ask this question, Rabbi. I know we have made Aliyah late in our lives, but it seems like the pool of available applicants, as it were, in Israel, given the amount of young Jewish men and women here, is sizable, and it also is in the United States. But there are certain points in people's lives, maybe when they have an opportunity to come. Maybe it's something, if they're not having success in the United States, should they think about coming here? How do you think Israel plays into this? I mean, Israel is a place that, honestly, you look at it's a place where even secular people are having lots of children. It's different than America. The culture is a little different. And maybe there's something positive getting here, as difficult as a mitzvah as that is.
One thing I will say, I myself have been in Israel for 10 years, still adjusting, getting there. One thing I will say, that Israeli society, and again I include secular as well as religious, I'm not limited to religious, is a very family-oriented society. I mean, of course you have your swingers in Tel Aviv, but by and large, there's a big commitment to family, to having children. Part of it is because there's a certain tragic dimension in Israeli life. We've been through so many wars. Right. Young men primarily have died. Men and women have died in terrorist attacks. I think there's a sense that every child is very, very precious. Even within the medical system, you'll find fertility treatments are covered by insurance, much more so than in the United States, and the government subsidizes every child that you have. So it is a family-friendly society. Whatever criticisms you might have of Israel as a whole, one of its great strengths is that marriage and children are treasured, and that's even true to some degree, within the secular segments of the population as well. In fact, I've often said, and other people have said it as well, that a secular Israeli still has more or less some type of strong Jewish identification. 90% fast on Yom Kippur, light Shabbos candles, etc., even if they don't, keep all the halachas. So Aliyah is something that I think every Jew needs to take into account, at least ask the question. Now, Aliyah may not be for everybody, because some of the adjustments may be difficult, and I have to be honest. As I tell people, before I made Aliyah, I used to say everybody has to come. After I make Aliyah, I said, well, maybe it's not for everybody. But the thing is, it is irresponsible and a dereliction of duty not to ask the question, why am I not in Israel? Maybe you'll have a good answer, maybe you won't. But to simply ignore the question is irresponsible. We've been praying for 2,000 years. Bring us back, bring us back, bring us back. And God says, well, come back. What's stopping you? A 12-hour El Al flight, and now, you can get Ben and Jerry's and Skippy peanut butter. What are you lacking? You can have everything. You can have everything here. I mean, even 30 years ago, you had to wait 6 months to get a telephone. Things were a little hard. Now, Baruch Hashem, with Nefesh B'Nefesh, you can finish the paperwork before you land. So things are a lot easier. And I have to say too, although I'm not a prophet, obviously, but if you look at what's happening in the United States, and of course my own children are in the United States, and I am an American citizen, and I'm very appreciative to the United States. But there are a lot of things that are happening that are matters of concern, not just Corona, which of course affects Israel as well, but kind of the breakdown of law and order, the real possibility of armed revolution depending on the outcome of the election from either side, right. Actually, and the fact that there are calls for defunding the police, as it were, in which crime will just be rampant. There seems to be an unraveling of a civilization that was typically relatively stable for more than 2 centuries. And obviously, I don't know what's going on fully. I don't know if anybody does other than Hashem. But one of the possible interpretations is that God is maybe sending a message to the Jewish people that, the Galut in America had a nice run and a lot of good things were accomplished, but it's time to get out, time to come home.
Right.
In New York now, just in reaction to the corona, so Como issued a restriction that no synagogue can have more than 10 people. Well, Baruch Hashem, Lisa said 10 people, not 9 people. But I mean, you have shows that have 1,000 seats. And, initially he said you can have 50% capacity with distancing.
Right.
10 people, there was no restriction for any other activity. I mean, it's almost as if the Jewish people are being singled out.
Right.
And zip codes, Jewish zip codes, if you look at social media, you see the rise of real anti-Semitic sentiments there. So, I don't like to read the tea leaves. I'm not that type of prognosticator. But I think, Hashem is sending us messages. And, now, Israel, of course, is becoming and has become more and more westernized with the passage of time. And that's both for the good, but unfortunately it's also for the bad. So there's a bit of kind of a delay, maybe a 10-year delay. Unfortunately, a lot of the negative stuff from there finds its way over here. Right. But still, I think there is a core of commitment to family, to children, to marriage, that is very, very strong here, and it's still here, and I hope it'll last. And this is a good place to raise a child. Of course, there are complications. We could maybe do an Aliyah show at a different time.
Right.
You got to be sure to find the right school, which is not easy. You might figure, in a typical American city, maybe you'll have 2 or 3 at a maximum day schools. All right, you got to choose. Here, you may have 100, right. But with that multiplicity of choices, it's very hard to sometimes find the right fit. So that is a challenge for those who have children. But overall, if you do your homework, you have friends, and you have a sense of humor and resilience, you can make a very, very wonderful life here.
Great. I guess I just want to close, Rabbi, if you have any closing thoughts. If you're talking to a couple of Jewish singles that are in their mid-20s right now, and you want to give them thought or two, just
I just want to say that we live in a very competitive society, and again, I'm primarily speaking about the United States. To the extent that now they have exclusive kindergartens in Manhattan. This is before Corona, I gather, which actually had a 5-year waiting list for admission. Now you think about that. If you have a 5-year waiting list for a kindergarten, that means as soon as your wife gets pregnant, you better register the kid so that 5 years later they can go to kindergarten. And why is that important? Because you're going to meet makers and shakers in kindergarten that will determine your private school and your high school and your college and your graduate school. And there's always another ring on the merry-go-round, the golden ring that we're trying to grab. So what happens is a person tries to get into the best high school, best college, best law school. I'll take law as an example that I'm familiar with. Then you want to get a Wall Street partnership. And you keep on going and going and going and going. But what happens is at some point you reach as high as you're going to reach. Meaning at some point everybody knows they're not going to be president of the United States, or they're not going to be on the Supreme Court, or they're not going to win an Olympic gold medal, or they're not going to be in the World Series. So what do you do with the second half of your life? What do you do when you've gone as far as you're going to go in this material world of success? Alexander the Great, legend has it, died at the age of 30 or 31 after he conquered the whole known world. I mean, that's a fact, that's not a legend, but the legend is that his last words were, "What other worlds do I have to conquer?" Mm-hmm. And he died, the legend says, out of heartbreak. And this is going to happen. People who live lives that are based on gratification, money, power, success, at some point, maybe it'll be in their 30s, maybe their 40s, maybe their 50s, they're going to hit a wall. Call it midlife crisis, call it burnout, you can call it many, many different names. Because at some point, there may be enough energy in the achievements that propels them. But then, at the end of the day, they're going to say, what have I accomplished in life? Now, it's hard. Atlee Stevenson, well, actually, George Bernard Shaw once said, it's a pity that youth is wasted on the young. They don't know how to use it. And Atlee Stevenson once gave a very, very beautiful speech at a college graduation, in which he said, there is so much I could tell you based on my experience, but you're not going to listen to me. You're going to have to experience it yourself. So, in a way, when you sit and you tell a young fellow who's still in the middle of this rat race, it's not going to be that much, that important. They're not going to always hear you. But the truth of the matter is, without a spiritual foundation, without a family, without a community, without a devotion to something beyond yourself, you're setting yourself up for sadness and frustration and loneliness at the end of the day. And therefore one has to think a little bit. We spend so much time preparing for a livelihood and so little time preparing for a life. And I think marriage, family, all goes into, what type of life do I have? I think there's a grave in England going back to the Middle Ages that says something like, born a man, died a lawyer. And that's a very interesting point. You're born a human being, but at some point the careerism takes it over. I'm no longer a person, I'm just the career. But life has to be richer than that. It has to be deeper than that. And that's where family, Torah, mitzvos, and family play that vital role in enriching and deepening the life that you have. Okay, thank you. Again, I wish you much hatzlacha and success.
Thank you, Rabbi Breitowitz. That was fantastic. Those are foundational thoughts that I think we could all use. And thank you, Rabbi Poston, for sponsoring this. And we look forward to our next installment and hope you will join us with Yiboneh and Jewish Family Forever. And we look forward to building the best Jewish families we can across the world.
Amen. Thank you.
It's